Postmodern slasher whodunits are ludic. They centralise an invitation to play, that's an invitation to guess who the killer is. But these films are complicated by another prevailing characteristic of the postmodern slasher phase: the invitation to identify intertextual references and Easter eggs. Viewers are encouraged to draw on their subgeneric knowledge to understand in-jokes. I've made another video about that topic and I'll link to it in the description. That tendency is important for my current argument about the postmodern slasher whodunit because it spills over. Viewers are invited to apply their knowledge of previous slasher films and how the subgenre works in order to solve the mystery. But filmmakers frequently and actively misdirect fans by exploiting the expectations that come from familiarity with the subgenre. To see how this works, let's start with one of the slasher film's most recognisable formal devices, the killer point of view shot. Those shots have two related functions. First, they obscure the killer's identity. Second, they build suspense by giving viewers access to information the protagonists don't have, revealing the killer's location, or suggesting that a kill's about to happen. Even so, we don't know exactly when, how, or whether the killer will strike. And the technique can generate its own surprises that are evident from the earliest stages of the subgenre's development. Both Halloween and Friday the 13th use point-of-view sequences to unveil unexpected killers: a child, Michael Myers in the opening of Halloween, and a middle-aged woman, Pamela Voorhees, in Friday the 13th. Postmodern slasher films inherit that technique, but they also exploit it. One way of exploiting point-of-view shots is familiar from the boom period slasher films, building anticipation that a killer's about to strike and then undercutting that expectation. One clear example of a postmodern slasher film that uses that technique is Butchered. A handheld point-of-view shot shows someone picking up a clown mask before putting it on, limiting the field of vision to the mask's eye holes. Then they retrieve a knife and approach a bathroom where the protagonist, Daphne, is showering. When the person wearing the mask seems to attack, we cut to a third-person view and we see that the person wearing the mask was actually Daphne's friend, Jenny.
You were so freaked out. What are you doing? A killer has to be quiet to be successful, right?
Oh, very funny.
That kind of fake-out's quite common in boom period slasher films. What's added here is the self-conscious inclusion of several intertextual references. The clown mask point of view shot echoes Halloween's opening. And the shower attack is mildly reminiscent of Psycho's famous kill scene, most notably in the way she's waving the knife around. Intertextuality matters here. Fans who recognise the references are then primed to expect that Daphne will be killed because victims die in Halloween and in Psycho's correlating sequences. Here, those expectations are set up and then undercut. So, subgenre knowledge doesn't sharpen a viewer's perceptions here. It's used to trip up fan viewers. A more elaborate version of the point of view trick is used in Paranoid. Just before the film's antagonist Norman is defeated, he tells our final girl,
I didn't kill Becca.
That implies that another murderer is at large. Later, when Sarah is recovering in bed, we see a man, shown only from the neck down, watching news about her survival on TV. We then see the man approaching and entering her house. Point of view shots then show the camera ascending the stairs, entering her room, hiding on the floor beside her bed, and then climbing onto it. The continuity between the third-person shots of the man and the subsequent point of view shots suggests that the killer has crept up on Sarah. A reverse shot then reveals that the point of view belongs to a cockroach. The misdirection sets up the final scare when Sarah looks to screen right and screams, suggesting that the killer has entered while she was distracted by the insect. The sequence demonstrates how the postmodern slasher films don't just rely on and exaggerate conventional cliches, they leverage familiarity with those cliches to surprise viewers. Where this starts to matter to us is that the same principle applies when it comes to solving the murder mystery. It's reasonable to expect that knowing more about the subgenre should help viewers to guess who the killer is based on their previous experience and expertise. Fan viewers should be better equipped to solve the mystery than any newcomer to the subgenre. But here, prior subgeneric knowledge can hinder more than it helps, because filmmakers used established expectations to wrongfoot viewers. And in fact, we've already seen some examples of this in action across previous parts of the series. I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer draws on expectations set up in I Know What You Did Last Summer to trick viewers. Here, director Sylvain White explains that a scene where the protagonist Amber finds a note is set up as a decoy.
So this is the decoy shot. Obviously, if people have seen the other two movies, this is the moment where the character finds out they're going to be stalked by a killer. And so for those familiar with this, then there is a decoy here because we found out it's just a note from her mom and dad. So we're already establishing here that the myth is not working the exact same way than in the previous films.
Now that decoy, as he notes, is aimed specifically at viewers who've seen the previous films in the series and who would reasonably expect the note to read "I know" or "I know what you did last summer." When White's talking about the myth not working in the same way in his sequel, what he means is the approach is building towards the eventual reveal that the killer in this entry is a supernatural entity.
As we'll find out, the myth, the fisherman is a supernatural being.
Which is a surprise because the preceding two films have both focused on a living killer, Ben Willis, and, as I noted in part 3, White points towards various living human characters as suspects, which leads us away from the idea that it might be a supernatural killer. What I'm demonstrating here is the way that knowledge of preceding films sets up expectations about a killer's identity and what kind of entity the killer will be, and White exploits those expectations to obscure the turn towards the supernatural in I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer. That approach was founded in Scream, which firmly established that prior subgeneric knowledge isn't necessarily useful in the postmodern slasher whodunit situation. One reason that works so well in Scream is because of another form of misdirection. Billy and Stu's plan draws on horror fiction.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Since they draw on horror's conventions, their targets should be able to counter them by drawing on the same knowledge, and some scholars have argued that Sidney survives because she uses that kind of knowledge. But Scream pushes against that conclusion. Sidney doesn't claim to have any knowledge about the slasher subgenre or horror in general.
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
The film's movie buffs are Randy and Billy. So when Billy's seemingly killed, Sidney doesn't have any subgenre knowledge to use to anticipate what will happen next. And you'll note here that Randy warns her.
This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Not in my movie.
So here it isn't that Sidney's got some insider knowledge, she doesn't anticipate the killer's return. She follows Randy's advice when he identifies the convention. Her phrasing,
Not in my movie.
just follows Randy's way of speaking. But even more importantly, Randy's fan knowledge doesn't really help him to survive. As Scream's most prominent movie buff, of all the characters, he should be able to use his knowledge to survive, but he's killed in Scream 2. While Sidney's still alive in Scream 7. One of the series' greatest mysteries is why the protagonists continue to listen to Randy's subgenre-based advice in Scream 3, even though it didn't save him.
If you're watching this tape, it means, as I feared, I did not survive these killings here at Windsor College. The reason I am here is to help you so that my death will not be in vain, that my life's work will help save some other poor soul from getting mutilated.
But there's something broader at stake in how Randy is depicted. In part 1 of this series, I laid out that critics often complain that slasher film victims are presented as idiots who behave foolishly. The idea is that they'd survive if they had the same knowledge about the subgenre that the viewer has. Viewers then might feel superior to the characters who fail to understand the conventions that govern their fates. Scream counters that stance by showing that even someone as knowledgeable about slasher conventions as Randy can lapse into conventional behaviours. He's just as vulnerable as the characters who are oblivious to the subgenre. To function as a slasher film, most protagonists have to die at the hands of the killer. So even if the protagonists are savvy, they still have to die in spite of that knowledge. Despite being aware that a killer is on the loose, many postmodern slasher teens are ill-prepared for the danger around them, behaving as if they're invulnerable. Consequently, they can come across as more reckless, arrogant, or cocky than 1980s slasher teens do. That isn't to say someone like Randy is an idiot, clearly he isn't. It is to say that knowledge of horror conventions wouldn't help one to survive an attack in the real world, and from the characters' perspectives, the story world is their reality. Scream makes it clear that the viewer's world and the filmic world are separate, and knowledge about one realm doesn't translate into the other, which is precisely the mistake that critics are making when they call characters idiots, as I laid out in part 1. That position's clear in this scene from Scream, where Randy tries to warn Halloween's protagonist about the danger behind her, while simultaneously failing to notice the killer behind him.
Jamie, look behind you.
Randy can't warn the on-screen character any more than we can warn him from our supposedly superior vantage point. Scream highlights the distance between the on-screen and the off-screen by having Randy call out to Jamie, as in Jamie Lee Curtis, rather than the character she plays, Laurie. The same applies to our position while watching Randy, where we could offer the same useless advice, Jamie, look behind you, to Randy, who's played by Jamie Kennedy. And that's just one of the ways that Scream critiques the power that insider knowledge supposedly offers us. Scream isn't alone in making this critique. For example, many stalking sequences in Black Serenade rest on epistemic disadvantage.
Sobre la trampa, siempre hay otra trampa. Tras un engaño, siempre hay.
So here, the killer stalks and films Michelle while she walks through the streets, seemingly live streaming the footage online. Eduardo watches the stream, guiding Alex and Trout as they race to reach Michelle. Tensions generated by cutting between the pair racing through the crowds and Eduardo's commentary. Later, that tension's undermined when the investigating detective, Victor, realises that the footage wasn't live.
La sesión comenzaba a las 7. Sin embargo, la hora a la que se enviaron las imágenes eran las 8, lo cual quiere decir...
Coño, era una grabación.
El Tuno grabó la persecución a Michelle y la envié como si fuera directo.
So, during the chase, Michelle had already been captured. She couldn't have been saved. The time delay trick is also played on the viewer, not just on the characters, because the perspective we have is just as flawed as theirs. Since Black Serenade is a murder mystery, the most significant aspect of the time delay is that it allows Alex to mask her identity as the killer, both from the other characters and from us. Only later do we realise that the anxiety she expressed during the chase was just performance.
Quiso que viéramos cómo la mataba. Salimos a intentar detenerle.
Pues no tuviste mucho éxito.
But as noted in part 1 of this series, Black Serenade stresses that viewers' and characters' perspectives yield very different information. Alex hides her status as the killer from the other characters, but we are even further disadvantaged in guessing whodunit because Alex hides her identity. Alex is the film's lead protagonist and seems to be its final girl, so, conventionally speaking, she's the least likely to be the killer. More vitally, she's also our central point of epistemic access, and that narrative position, we only realise later, makes her an unreliable source of evidence. The characters aren't encumbered by either of those problems from within the situation. Black Serenade highlights these epistemic problems as part of its narrative's game. The story set at a university, and its opening lecture begins with the proclamation,
La ignorancia mata. Y yo soy el único que puede salvarles de esa muerte.
So, early on, a direct connection is made between restricted knowledge and mortal vulnerability. Ignorance kills. That connection is confirmed by the killer's method. Alex kills students with the lowest marks, and when she reveals herself in the climax, she restates that principle.
La ignorancia mata. Recuerda, solo limpia la universidad de gente que no la merece. Es un privilegio acceder al conocimiento.
Note that postmodern slasher whodunits are frequently set in places of learning, institutions that are meant to instill knowledge. That narrative context is common across the subgenre. Lots of slasher films are set around colleges and high schools. But the postmodern slasher's emphases on paranoia, epistemic doubt, and the teens' awareness of their own peril colour that motif. So here, the narrative context underlines that the victims are vulnerable because of a knowledge gap. Even though they recognise that they're in danger, they are unable to protect themselves, not because they are idiots, but because they don't know who the killer is.